What if I told you that every single choice you make, from what you had for breakfast to the career path you're on, follows a hidden pattern? Yeah, our actions are guided by these forces we rarely, if ever, actually see. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on these hidden patterns, zooming all the way out from the inside of our own minds to the massive structures of society itself.
So let me ask you something, and I want you to keep this in the back of your mind as we go. What is the hidden pattern behind your actions? Seriously, think about it. Because if you can start to see that, you're on your way to understanding everything else.
All right, so to crack this whole thing open, we've got to start at the very beginning. We have to start with us. What are the fundamental blueprints that make you tick? Well, according to the philosopher Ben Goertzel, the most basic building block of our mind, of our consciousness, is the idea of pattern. It's how our brain takes all the random, scattered events happening around us and organizes them into something that makes sense. It's literally how we create meaning out of chaos.
Okay, so where do these mental patterns even come from? For ages, psychology has been wrestling with this huge debate, nature versus nurture. Are we just a product of our genes, our DNA, or are we shaped by our experiences? Well, as the psychologist Hans Eysenck points out, the modern view is it's both. It's not one or the other, but this complex, really dynamic dance between the two. And one of the most fundamental patterns that's literally hardwired into us is this constant search for balance. There's a biological word for it, homeostasis. When we're hungry, we eat. That's simple enough. But it's psychological too. When we feel lonely, we reach out to a friend. When we're bored, we find ourselves scrolling our phones. It's this constant unconscious drive to get back to a calm, balanced state, and it's a core pattern that dictates so much of what we do every single day. Okay, so we've got these internal patterns pushing and pulling us towards balance. But what happens when my patterns collide with your patterns? Let's zoom out a bit from the individual mind and see how we're constantly shaping each other's behavior.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Check out this provocative idea from Eysenck and Wilson. They argue that manipulation, well, it isn't necessarily a dirty word. They say it's just the essence of social life. Think about it. From a teacher guiding a student to you convincing a friend which movie to see, we are in a constant, subtle dance of mutual influence.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. You've probably seen this in action. H.A. Overstreet called it the yes response technique. The whole idea is to create a pattern of agreement. You get someone to say yes to a few small, easy things first. You build this momentum, this yes-saying habit. And by doing that, they become psychologically way more likely to agree with your final, bigger request. It's fascinating. And that's the key, right? Influence works best when it taps into the patterns that are already there, our fundamental wants. We are all driven by this deep-seated desire for things like adventure, or travel, or status, or just a sense of ownership. The most effective influence doesn't create new desires out of thin air. It just holds up a mirror to the ones we already have. All right, time to pull the camera back even further. What happens when we can see these patterns not just between two people, but across millions? What happens when modern technology becomes a kind of giant microscope for human behavior out in the wild? Take a look at this. Now, at first glance, it might just look like a bunch of scribbles on a map, but this is powerful stuff. Every time you carry your phone, you're creating a data trail of where you go. When researchers analyze all this trajectory data, really clear patterns start to emerge. Your daily commute, your trip to the grocery store, your weekend walk in the park, it all forms a predictable, observable routine. So how on earth do scientists make sense of all this messy, chaotic data? Well, they use this really clever statistical tool. The best way to think about it is like creating a heat map of your life. The places you go most often, your home, your work, your favorite coffee shop, they start to glow brighter. This technique, called a kernel density estimate, lets them find those hot spots and reveals the core habits that are hidden in all the noise of our daily movements. Okay, but why go to all this trouble? What's the point? Well, the ultimate goal here is something incredibly human and, honestly, really important. It turns out that subtle changes in our daily routines, tiny shifts in our movement patterns, can be very early warning signs of cognitive decline. So by creating a baseline pattern of a person's normal behavior, this technology could one day help us spot serious health issues way, way earlier than we can today.
Okay, let's take our next big leap outwards. We've seen patterns inside our minds and in our daily routines, but can we actually use this understanding to design better, safer, healthier societies? You know, when you really think about it, the simple truth is that nearly every major problem we face, from public health and climate change to economic stability, is, at its core, a human behavior problem. The success or failure of any big solution comes down to our actions.
And we have some incredibly powerful examples of this working. Just think about seatbelts. Getting people to buckle up was a massive behavioral challenge, but over time, through smart policies, education, and design, it became a social norm. And the result? It's staggering. An estimated 329,715 lives saved in the US alone. A simple change in a collective pattern had a monumental impact.
So how do governments make this happen on purpose? Do they just guess? No. They use a blueprint, kind of like the one you're seeing here. They weave social science into every single step. First, they use it to evaluate if a program's goals are even realistic. Then, they test different ways to roll out new policies to see what actually works. And finally, they partner up with communities to make sure the solutions stick in the real world. It's all about designing policies that work with our human nature, not against it.
All right, for our final piece of the puzzle, we're going to take the biggest leap yet. If the mind is just a pattern, what does that mean for the future of intelligence itself, especially now as we're entering the age of AI?
This is where that original idea from Ben Goertzel, that the mind is a pattern, comes roaring back. And it is a mind-bender. Because if he's right, then our human mind, with all its brilliance and all its flaws, is probably just one possible arrangement. We might be occupying just one tiny, tiny corner in a vast universe of possible minds, some of which we might be on the verge of creating ourselves.
And this leads us to these huge, profound questions that the science fiction author Philip K. Dick was obsessed with. As we get closer and closer to creating genuinely artificial minds, these two questions become more urgent than ever. If an AI can think, feel, and create based on its own patterns, what does that do to our definition of what is human, and for that matter, what is even real anymore?
So, we end up right back where we started, but the view is completely different now, isn't it? We've journeyed from the tiny patterns inside our own heads to the massive ones that shape our entire world. The final question isn't just about understanding the patterns that already exist, but about dreaming up the ones that don't. If the mind truly is a pattern, the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves is this: what patterns will we create next?